The lake has always been more than just water to Mitt, was the heart of my family's legacy. My grandfather built a small wooden cabin on the edge of that quiet lake, tucked behind tall pines and whispering oaks. Every summer, we gathered there fishing, telling stories, and singing around the fire. The lake wasn't just property. It was memory. It was love. So when I retired and moved back to the cabin for good, I thought I'd finally found peace. But peace rarely lasts when arrogance comes knocking, especially when it wears the face of an HOA Karen. It was a warm Saturday morning when the trouble began. My old fishing buddies, men I'd known for 50 years, came with their families for a weekend by the water. We set out lawn chairs, packed coolers with sandwiches, and let the kids splash along the shore. The sound of their laughter echoed across the water like music. And then, the music stopped. A sharp voice cut through the air. "Excuse me? Excuse me? You can't be here." I turned and saw her Karen. Perfectly pressed blouse. Oversized sunglasses, clipboard clutched to her chest like a weapon. She marched down the hill as though the world belonged to her. One of my guests, an old friend named Carl, whispered, "Who's that drill sergeant?" I sighed. "That's Karen, the self-appointed queen of the HOA across the road." Karen stopped at the edge of my dock, pointing her finger like she was leading a trial. "This lake is reserved for HOA members only. Guests are not allowed to swim, fish, or loiter here." I stood slowly, brushing sand from my jeans. "Karen, this is my property. My friends are here as my guests." Her jaw tightened. No, the HOA manages this lake. You can't just bring people here like it's a public park." I felt heat rise in my chest. She didn't just question my rights. She disrespected the memories of my grandfather, my father, and every summer we'd spent here. I spoke firmly, but calmly. "Karen, maybe you're used to giving orders, but this land, this shoreline, it's mine. My grandfather bought it in 1952. The HOA doesn't own an inch of it." Her face flushed crimson. "That's impossible. All homeowners have equal rights to the lake?" I chuckled bitterly. "Equal rights? Karen, I'm not a member of your HOA. This is private land, passed down through my family. My friends will stay as long as they want." The guests went quiet, tension hanging heavy in the air. Children stopped splashing, watching the standoff with wide eyes. My wife Linda squeezed my hand gently as if to say, "Stay calm, but don't back down." Karen puffed her chest. "If you don't comply, I'll call security. I'll call the board." "You'll regret this." Carl, my oldest friend, stood beside me. His voice shook, but not from fear, from anger. "Lady, do you hear yourself? This isn't your kingdom. You don't own this man's lake." Karen froze, her lips pressed into a thin line. She was used to scaring people, to controlling them. But my land wasn't a playground for her authority. I took one step closer, my voice low, but clear enough for everyone to hear. "Karen, let me make this very simple. This is my private land. You have no jurisdiction here. And if you ever try to harass my guests again, you'll be the one answering to the law." Her eyes widened. For the first time, she didn't have a comeback. She simply turned, muttering under her breath as she stormed up the hill. The tension broke. The children cheered, splashing water again. Carl slapped my back with a grin. "That was one heck of a show. You should have seen her face." I forced a smile, but deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Karen wasn't the type to walk away quietly. She was the kind of storm that came back stronger the next day. Linda leaned close and whispered, "Be careful. People like her don't forgive. They plot." I looked out across the lake, the sun dancing on the ripples. I'd fought for peace before, but this time felt different. This wasn't just about my land. It was about respect, about family, about standing up for what was right. And I had no idea how ugly the storm was about to get. The next morning, the lake was quiet, but my heart wasn't. I woke up before sunrise, brewed a pot of coffee, and sat on the porch, staring out over the misty water. The calm should have been comforting. But Linda's words from the night before echoed in my mind. People like her don't forgive. They plot. She was right. By mid-morning, my uneasy feeling became reality. A line of shiny SUVs pulled up near the entrance of my gravel driveway. Out stepped Karen, clipboard in hand, followed by 3 men and 1 woman dressed in stiff suits. They looked like they'd never set foot on dirt before. I walked down the path to meet them before they reached the cabin. Karen's voice rang out, loud and commanding, like a bell announcing bad news. There he is. This is the man violating community rules. One of the men, tall and lean, adjusted his tie. Sir, we're from the Lakeside HOA board. We've received multiple complaints about unauthorized use of the lake. I folded my arms across my chest. Complaints from who? Karen smirked. From concerned residents. This lake is for HOA members and their immediate families, not random outsiders. My patience thinned. Listen carefully. I'm not part of your HOA. I never signed your agreements. My land is shore, this dock. This cabin has been private property since long before your subdivision even existed. The woman in the group stepped forward with a forced smile. Sir, surely you understand community resources are meant to be shared. It disrupts harmony when one property owner refuses to follow the guidelines. I bit back a laugh. Harmony. You show up at my home with threats and paperwork, and you call it harmony? Linda appeared beside me, her voice calm but sharp. This is harassment. We've been patient, but this needs to stop, Karen cut in, her voice dripping with venom. If you don't comply, we'll fine you for every day your guests trespass. The fines could reach thousands. Carl, who had been sitting on the porch drinking coffee, stood and barked out a laugh. Fines. You can't fine a man for something you don't own. What kind of circus are you running? The board members shifted uncomfortably. They weren't used to pushback. Karen, however, thrived on the conflict. She jabbed her clipboard toward me like it was a sword. Mark my words, sir. You'll regret this. The HOA has power, and we will use it. I stared into her eyes, steady and unflinching. And I'll use Mentha law. I have the original deed, the surveys, every scrap of proof that this land and this section of the lake are mine. Now, unless you want the sheriff involved, get off my property. The words hit harder than I expected. The board members exchanged looks, muttered excuses, and began retreating to their cars. But Karen lingered. She leaned close, lowering her sunglasses to meet my gaze. You think you've won, she hissed, but I don't lose. Ever. Then she turned sharply and followed the others. The rest of the day, my guests tried to bring back the joy. The kids fished, the women cooked, the men told jokes. But there was a cloud over everything. Every laugh felt a little forced. Every splash in the water felt like it carried the weight of eyes watching from across the lake. As night fell, we gathered by the fire pit. The flames flickered, crackling against the cool air. Carl raised a can of soda and said, 2 old friends, stubborn land. And standing up to bullies, everyone chuckled. But there was an uneasiness beneath it. Linda leaned against me, whispering so only I could hear. She's not finished, Mark. I can see it in her eyes. She'll find another way. I kissed her forehead. Then we'll be ready. We weren't ready the very next week. I discovered just how far Karen was willing to go. It started with small things garbage mysteriously dumped near my dock. No trespassing signs for my property disappearing overnight. Then came the letters. Thick envelopes stuffed into my mailbox, filled with fake violation notices printed on HOA letterhead. One morning I found a note taped to my cabin door. In bold red letters, it read, "This lake belongs to the community. Stop acting like you're above the rules." My blood boiled. I drove straight to the county office, deed in hand, demanding confirmation. The clerk smiled kindly and reassured me. "Mr. Dawson, your land boundaries are crystal clear. The HOA has no authority here." Relief washed over me for a moment, but only a moment. Because when I got home, I found something worse. Karen had brought company again. This time, she hadn't come with board members. She'd brought security. 2 uniformed men stood at the edge of my dock, barking orders at my guests. You need to pack up and leave. HOA rules prohibit gatherings larger than 6 people at the lakefront. Carl's granddaughter, barely 10 years old, clutched her fishing rod and looked up at them with wide, scared eyes. But this is Mr. Dawson's house. That was all it took. My chest filled with fire. I stormed down the path, my boots crunching on the gravel. You two off my property. Now, the guards exchanged glances. Ma'am said. I cut them off. I don't care what ma'am said. This is private land. You're trespassing. You have 30 seconds before I call the sheriff. Karen appeared behind them, arms crossed, wearing a smug grin. Go ahead, call them. We'll see who they side with. Her confidence shook me for the first time. Did she really believe the sheriff would back her? Or was this just another scare tactic? I didn't care anymore. I pulled out my phone, dialed, and said, Sheriff's office. Yes, I have trespassers refusing to leave my private property. Send someone immediately. The color drained from Karen's face. She hadn't expected me to actually do it, for the first time since this nightmare began. She looked afraid. But I didn't know then what came next would not just shake her. It would shake the entire neighborhood. And it would test every ounce of strength I had left, because Karen wasn't about to back down. And the storm that followed would be the fight of my life. The flashing lights of the sheriff's cruiser cut through the twilight like a beacon. The moment I heard the crunch of tires on gravel, Karen's smug expression faltered. My guests gathered behind me, whispering nervously as the 2 security guards shifted uncomfortably. Clearly realizing they had overstepped, the sheriff, a tall man with weathered lines across his face, stepped out slowly. He looked like he'd seen every kind of nonsense this county could throw at him, but even so, I caught the flicker of irritation in his eyes as he took in the scene. Evening, he said, tipping his hat. Got a call about trespassing? Yes, sir, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. These men are on my dock, harassing my guests. They claim they were sent by the HOA, but this is private land. Karen stepped forward quickly, her voice sharp, dripping with false authority. Sheriff, thank goodness you're here. This man is lying. The lake is governed by our HOA. He's violating community bylaws by bringing in outsiders. We're only here to enforce the rules. The sheriff squinted at her. Ma'am, what's your name? Karen Peterson. Board liaison for the Lakeside HOA, she announced proudly, as if her title meant she ran the whole county. The sheriff nodded slowly, then turned to me. And you, sir? Mark Dawson. My family's owned this property since 1952. I have the original deed and survey maps. The HOA doesn't own an inch of this shoreline. I could feel the tension building like a storm. My wife Linda held my arm, her hand trembling. Behind me, Carl muttered under his breath, Here we go. The sheriff turned back to the guards. You two hired security? They nodded sheepishly. Yes, sir. HOA told us to come down here and enforce their lake rules. The sheriff's voice hardened. And you thought that gave you the right to stand on another man's dock and order people off his property? One guard mumbled, We were just doing our job. The sheriff shook his head. Your job ends where private property begins. Get in your truck now. The guards didn't argue. They shuffled off quickly, heads down, leaving Karen standing alone. Karen's face twisted with anger. Sheriff, you don't understand. If you let him get away with this, everyone will think they can ignore the HOA. It will ruin the community. The sheriff studied her for a long moment. Then his voice dropped low, calm but cutting. Ma'am, I don't work for your HOA. I work for the law. And the law says this man's land is his. If you keep stepping onto it without permission, you're the one committing trespass. Her jaw dropped, her cheeks turning crimson. You can't be serious. He's, she sputtered, unable to finish. The sheriff raised his hand. I'm very serious. One more complaint about you harassing this man or his guests, and I'll be filing charges. Do we understand each other? For the first time, Karen had no words. She stood frozen, fists clenched at her sides. Before finally spinning on her heel and storming up the hill, the sheriff turned back to me. Mr. Dawson, I suggest you keep your deed handy. people like her. They don't give up easy. But as far as the county's concerned, you're in the right. I let out a long breath I hadn't realized I was holding. Thank you, Sheriff. As he drove away, my guest cheered softly, clapping me on the back. But Linda wasn't smiling. She leaned close and whispered, "She's humiliated now. That makes her dangerous." And she was right. The days that followed brought a strange calm. Karen vanished. No yelling, no letters, no strangers on my dock. My guests relaxed, the kids played freely, and for a brief moment, it felt like the storm had passed, but calm often hides the worst storms. One evening, about a week later, I was sitting by the lake with Linda. The firelight flickering against her face, she sighed, finally looking peaceful. "Maybe she gave up," she said softly. I shook my head. Karen doesn't give up. She's planning something. I can feel it. The words had barely left my lips when we heard the roar of engines. Headlights cut across the water as 3 HOA trucks pulled up at the far end of the lake, where the public access ramp used to be. But this time, they weren't empty. They carried men with chainsaws, toolboxes, and heavy equipment. My heart dropped. Oh no, she wouldn't. Carl, who had been roasting marshmallows nearby, stood quickly. "Mark, look. They're going after your fence." We ran down the trail, my chest pounding. Sure enough, the men were tearing down the old wooden fence my grandfather had built to mark our boundary. The fence wasn't just wood, it was history. Every nail had been hammered by his hands. "Hey," I shouted, my voice echoing across the lake. "Stop. That's my property line." Karen appeared from behind the trucks, arms crossed, smiling coldly. "This fence is illegal. According to our records, the lakefront is community property. I'm removing it." Rage surged through me. "Those aren't your records. Those are lies. You're destroying my family's land." She shrugged. "Prove it in court." The men kept working, sawing through the boards, tearing down decades of history piece by piece. I felt helpless, torn between running at them and knowing it would only make things worse. Linda's voice trembled behind me. "Mark, what do we do?" I clenched my fists, shaking with anger. "We fight back. But not with fists, with the truth. She wants a war. She'll get one." That night, as I sat at the old cabin desk, I spread out every document I owned, deeds, maps, letters from the county clerk. My grandfather's signature stared back at me from the faded parchment. He had fought for this land once. Now it was my turn. Carl sat beside me, his voice low. "You know she won't stop until she's ruined or you are." I looked at him, my voice firm. "Then I'll make sure it's her." The fire crackled in the hearth. Linda sat quietly knitting, but I saw the worry in her eyes. She wanted peace, not war. But she also knew some fights couldn't be avoided. As I packed the documents into a folder, I whispered to myself a vow I wouldn't break. She can take down fences. She can scream and threaten. But she'll never take this lake from me. Not while I'm breathing. Little did I know, the battle ahead wouldn't just decide ownership of the land. It would uncover secrets buried for years in force. Karen to face consequences she never saw coming. The storm wasn't over. It was just beginning. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Karen smirk as her men tore down my grandfather's fence. The sound of chainsaws echoed in my mind like an insult carved into memory. By morning, I had made my decision. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about protecting my family's legacy. I packed every deed, survey, and document into a thick folder, kissed Linda on the cheek, and said, "Today we take this fight to the courthouse." Carl, always loyal, rode with me. "You sure about this?" he asked. I nodded. "If I let her get away with this, she'll take more. Maybe not from me, but from someone else." The county courthouse smelled of dust and old paper. I met with a property attorney, a gray-haired man named Mr. Whitaker. After scanning my documents, he gave a low whistle. "Mr. Dawson, you have nothing to worry about. Your deed is ironclad. The HOA doesn't own that shoreline, in fact." He flipped through the maps, frowning. They may have built part of their community dock on your land without permission. I blinked. Wait, are you saying? He nodded firmly. They're trespassing, not you. If you want, you could sue for damages. The weight of his words sank in. All this time, Karen had been accusing me of violating community rules, but it was her HOA that had crossed the line. I shook his hand. File the suit. A week later, the storm finally broke. I'll never forget the day of the hearing. The courtroom was packed. Neighbors, HOA board members, even curious onlookers. Karen sat at the front, chin lifted, eyes gleaming with false confidence. She looked like a queen, ready to claim her throne. When the judge entered, the room fell silent. Karen's lawyer began with his speech, painting me as a stubborn old man who refused to cooperate with community harmony. He talked about bylaws, rules, and the greater good. Karen sat behind him, nodding smugly as though victory was certain. Then my attorney stood, calm, deliberate, and armed with truth. He laid the original deed on the judge's bench. The ink faded, but still strong. He pointed to survey maps, property lines, and official county records. He even showed photos of my grandfather building the cabin decades, before the HOA was even imagined. And then came the twist. Mr. Whitaker placed another map on the bench. Your Honor, not only does the HOA lack authority over Mr. Dawson's property, but their own community dock extends 12 feet onto his land. For years, they've been trespassing without his permission. The room erupted in whispers. Karen's face turned pale, her hands gripping the table. The judge raised a hand for silence. After reviewing the documents, he spoke clearly. Mr. Dawson is the rightful owner of his shoreline property and adjoining lake access. The HOA has no authority over his land. Furthermore, the HOA has encroached on his property. They are ordered to remove their dock within 30 days and compensate Mr. Dawson for damages. The gavel struck. The sound echoed like thunder. Karen's jaw dropped. She sat frozen, her smugness shattered. The board members around her whispered angrily, some glaring at her as though realizing for the first time that she had led them into disaster. Carl leaned toward me, grinning ear to ear. Mark, you just knocked the crown right off the queen. I should have felt triumphant. But as I looked at Karen, red-faced, trembling, humiliated, I saw something else. She wasn't a queen anymore. She was just a person who had built her power on fear. And now that power was gone. And in that moment, I felt something unexpected. Pity. Back at the lake, life returned to normal. The dock was removed, my fence rebuilt, and the laughter of children once again filled the air. My friends toasted victory with root beer and grilled hot dogs. Linda hugged me tightly, whispering, "You did it. You've protected our home." Yet late one evening, spotted Karen standing across the lake. Alone, no clipboard, no sunglasses, no army behind her. Just a woman staring at the water. I walked over slowly, half expecting another fight. But when she turned, her eyes weren't angry, they were tired. "I lost everything," she muttered. "The board blames me. They want me off. My reputation. Gone." I didn't gloat. I didn't rub it in. Instead, I said quietly, "Karen, sometimes power blinds us. But land rules, money, they don't last. What lasts is how we treat people. That's what people remember." Her lips trembled. For once, she had no comeback. She just nodded, tears glistening in her eyes before walking away. That night, as I sat by the fire with Linda and Carl, I thought about it all. The fights, the anger, the fear. But also the laughter, the memories, and the love that tied me to the lake. I raised my glass and said softly, this land was never about ownership, papers, or rules. It was about family, friends, and the moments we create. No HOA, no Karen, no law can take that away. Linda smiled, resting her head on my shoulder. Carl clinked his can against mine. The fire crackled. The stars shimmered, and the lake reflected it all silent. Timeless, eternal, and deep in my heart. I knew my grandfather was smiling down on us. Asterisk, this story is just the beginning. There is so much more ahead. Subscribe to the channel to join me on this journey.